Hey, it's Colin. Welcome to the Patreon. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about basing and making your own bases for your armies. Basing is a great way to set the scene and continue to tell the story with your army on the table. I'm going to be walking through how I go about making a naturally textured base, and with some slate chips and some different um, sand textures. So it gives us a really great neutral base to work off of. And you using different paints, pigments, tufts, stuff like that, you can really evoke a lot of different settings with just this one naturally textured base. So as the overall basis for this base, I use golden coarse pumice gel, and this stuff is great. I love this stuff. It has a nice fine texture, but not too fine. And it's pre-mixed. It's ready to go. You can get it in a lot of craft stores, or of course on Amazon. So coarse pumice gel, they do make extra coarse. That's not ideal. So coarse pumice gel is the one that I always use, and I just apply it with popsicle stick. And one of the things I like about it is it's already pre-mixed. It's already ready to go. So you just get a bunch of it on the popsicle stick and start spreading it around. I'm gonna make sure to get a nice, you don't want it too thick, but you don't want to be able to necessarily see the base, because when this stuff dries it does shrink, and we're going to address that in the next stage when we go to add the sand on top of this. Then it's going to because it's going to shrink away from the edges, and it's going to shrink kind of wherever it's thinner. You're going to start to see some gaps. So we want initially we want to get a nice even coat, and you can see there it has some nice variation, and we're not doing this in any kind of measured way or thought out way. Randomness is your friend here. And then we're going to go through and we're just going to tap it with the popsicle stick. And what that's going to do, that's going to give little peaks and valleys. That's going to give some variation in height and density to different areas of the base, which is going to just blend more to that natural look for our base. So easy peasy. Then so you see all this kind of extra that's hanging out on the side there. Just take your finger and give it a wipe. You can go back after it's dry and kind of shave that off with like the back of an X-Acto or something like that, but it's easy just to do up front. And just get a little towel, wipe it off. This stuff's water soluble, so you don't have to worry about any kind of toxic anything. So here we have, you can see that really nice texture we're starting to get there. And next we add slate chips. This is also where you would add skulls or any of the kind of first layer of texture you want. I use slate chips from Small World Slate and Stone. I got these on Amazon, and these are 1/8 to 1/4 inch gravel for miniature or fairy garden or aquarium. And they make different sizes. The 1/8 to 1/4 inch is a good size, I've found. I do have a bag of the larger stuff to use for, if I'm doing a display board or something like that. So there are varying sizes, and in each bag you'll see we have a lot of variation in the slate. So you have these big chunks, and then you have these little flecks, and the more variation, the more natural it's going to look in the end, the more natural effect you're going to have. So we take our slate chips, get this back in the frame, take our slate chips, and then we just kind of sprinkle. Again, we don't want we don't want it to look too uniform. So, actually, I think I have a skull. I think I have a GW skull around here somewhere. I do. Any modeler worth their salt has some of those skulls lying around. So these are just the plastic GW skulls. It's my favorite box they've ever put out, period. So we're going to throw a skull on the base because grimdark and, you know, more skulls, better. And what we're doing now is we're just tapping these into the pumice gel. So this is going to adhere. When this dries, those slate chips are going to adhere to the pumice gel and they're going to stick. This is another reason I love this stuff, is you can do all this, and we're just going to put a happy little skull right there hanging out. So you see, we want to make sure that when we're pushing in the slate chips, we don't push too hard and kind of ruin that natural texture that we got with the popsicle stick. So that's just the initial, and that's it. This first stage of the base building, you can see kind of the height there. This first stage of base building is done. And so we put that off to the side. The only downside, if you're somebody in a hurry like me usually, this stuff does take a while to dry. You're probably looking at about 24 hours before you're able to work on this again. So thankfully, I have some bases waiting in the wings. And when it dries, you can see these slate chips are adhered. They're part of the base now. And you can see on the edges too where it's kind of shrunk away from the edges, and there are some low spots. There are some kind of gaping areas under some of those slate chips. Especially here at the top, you can see where it's kind of pulled away and left some divots, if you will. Those aren't ideal, especially on the front here. Those aren't ideal. You want to make sure that you have a texture to cover the whole top of the base. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get an old beat up brush and some PVA glue. Mod Podge works also in the craft store. Well, it worked really well to glue that lid shut. So Mod Podge works really well, and what we're going to do is we're going to water this down because we don't want that added height that the thick glue would give us if we just used Mod Podge or PVA straight out of the container. Because it's so thick and it would kind of round it off while it dries. We don't want that because it looks unnatural. So what we're going to do, we have a little bit of the PVA glue in there, and then we're going to add some water. Get an old brush, and we're going to mix that around. And it's okay if this is watery. It's pretty watery. Might be a little too watery. So we just get, we want it a little watery. We don't necessarily want it that watery because we do want it to, stick. There we go. Just a couple more drops of glue in there. And when I'm doing these bases, I usually do as many, I'll do 30 or 40 at a time. It's a really good project to do en masse. You don't want to be necessarily doing these one by one, but if you do, it doesn't take that long. The longest thing you're going to be waiting for is just drying times. So we have our watered down PVA. That's a good consistency. And then we're going to go and just fill in areas where we want our sand to go. And we're going to be using a really fine grain sand, decorative sand, again from a craft store. They usually put them in like centerpieces or decorative, vases or something. But it's a really fine grain sand. So this is this is the sand that I got. It's a huge bag for like $2. But you can see just how fine that sand is. And when we're working on a scale like 40, let's clear that off for you. When we're working on a scale like 40K, you don't want to you want to be able to kind of keep the landscape in scale where they're not, they're not walking around on kitty litter with these huge baseball sized boulders that you want to look like sand. So the finer sand you can find, the better. And this stuff is really, really good kind of decorative sand. So when we're doing this, and we're doing this to create a variance in texture, we're doing this to create a variance in kind of feel for the ground cover. So we're not just going around the edge to fill it in, because then that would look a little funky if there's one texture in the middle of the base and then this kind of rim of fine sand around the outside. So what we're doing is we're going in kind of the low spots and around some of the rocks, is we're putting that watered down PVA. And then I usually like to have, I'll use a tray or something to put under it when I'm sprinkling. But for just one base, I'm just going to use the lid to the container. And you just want to kind of sprinkle the sand where we put that watered down PVA. This doesn't have to be, this is the definition of an inexact science. So we just want to make sure that we get sand wherever we put the PVA. Tap it off. And there you can see, and there you can see that we're starting to get that. And again, wipe it off with a finger. Voila. And there you can see we're starting to get that variation. So there's 3 distinct textures now that we have going on. We have the original coarse pumice gel, we have the slate, and then we have the sand. And when we prime it all, it's going to bring it all together, and it's going to give a more natural look to the base. So we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to paint a couple different variations of this base and how different they can look based on this one texture. And so we'll have that for you soon. Thanks a lot.